There you go. Carbon neutral fireplace.
So seriously, we were talking last week. He says, Bob, I don't want to do slides. I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, I want to have a fireplace chat. And I thought, we're going to do it. Whatever it takes, we're going to do it. So anyway, you can see why this guy was so successful. And he does have a place on the key, and we use him right here. I mean, why don't you just move here? You could be part of the climate center. We could put you back in Congress. It would be wonderful.
You're gonna.
I know. I'm not going to go any further than that. But what I do want to ask you is a few questions. So much of this is because our rules and regulations now were made in 1990. And the climate has changed since then. We've been talking about that all day. But we haven't modernized our processes. And we're still sort of plodding along like it's 1990. And we're trying to make decisions based on that framework without changing it. So you have the view from Miami, you have the view from the United States Congress. Like, how many people have the biggest city in the world, as far as I know, in the United States, that has climate issues like this, and a member of the U.S. Congress? Two very unique things. What would you say to our local officials about modernizing the processes so that we can make quicker, so we can do this quicker, even if we all agree?
Yeah. So that's a great point, and it reminds me of an opportunity that this Congress has. Of course, and again, you're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act now and the important investments made there to promote clean energy. But there's a major obstacle, which ironically was put in place by environmentalists. Permitting is a major challenge in this country at every level, at the federal level, at the state level, and at the city and county level. And that is in some ways intentional because environmental groups over the decades wanted to slow things down and make sure that they had every possible opportunity to put up blocks, right? Or at least ask questions or file lawsuits, whatever it is. The problem now is that those policies are inhibiting solar plants, nuclear plants, wind farms. The permitting process is so complex. So on the one hand, we have a system that's designed to protect the environment by being slow, by limiting development, but we have a great need to develop more and faster because we're actually developing projects that are going to help the environment heal. So this is one where, and doing a lot of work right now in this space, Republicans and Democrats should easily be willing to come to the table because no one should be in favor of government intentionally and purposely being inefficient and slow and blocking progress. So that's a major potential win in this very evenly divided Congress.
And that seems to me to be something we can do that will reduce inflation. That would actually be an inflation reducer.
That's right. I mean, and look, and we have all over the state, but it's very acute in Miami, a housing affordability crisis, right? And one of the challenges is that it takes so long to get permits to build. I mean, look, the best solution to expensive housing is more housing. And the reason why housing is so expensive in Florida is because there's so much demand. So we need to deliver more units, but government gets in the way. So government failures can be a uniting theme for policymakers of different ideologies at this particular time, and it would help reduce inflation, as would diversifying our energy supply, right? How we get our energy. The less dependent we are on on oil and gas, the better for our country. Of course, as long as we don't jeopardize our energy security. And some of our friends who would like to see oil and gas go away tomorrow put policies in place that actually jeopardize our energy security and are partially responsible for the very high energy prices that we've experienced in recent months.
So that leads me to another question, and that is, we have had 6 major hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. In Florida, we've had 3 since Mike, Category 5, Irma, Category 4, and Ian, a Category 4, almost 5. I mean, we really haven't been hit like this in a long time. And then we had Nicole, who came just breezing by at 75 miles an hour that did unbelievable damage on the East Coast along the eroded shorelines there. So we have spent so much money on disaster response. How can we get some of this money reprogrammed into lowering the risk a priori, rather than just spending money to repair things?
Yeah, so this is another issue where we should be able to come together. I mean, we should be investing on the front end of storms instead of paying to rebuild on the back end. And if we, listen, as you were asking me this question, I was thinking back at Hurricane Irma. You all didn't face the potential devastation or the worst of it on this coast, but I remember the only time in my life, so I'm someone who, I'm pretty, I'm cool with risk. My friends at Cumberland Advisory know that. I always call them with crazy investment ideas. But so, yeah, when a hurricane's coming, I always tell my wife, oh, we'll be fine, don't worry about it. It'll be. When Hurricane Irma, a massive Cat 5 storm was coming to Miami for the first time in my life, I said, let's go and check into the airport hotel, which is a very secure facility in Miami, because I was so concerned for our family, my wife and my 2 daughters. And it ended up working out because we lost power at home, and then we were there for 3 or 4 days until the power went back. Thankfully, the storm went south, and I mean, that storm, Bob, would have possibly erased Miami from the map.
Correct.
So we really have to make the investments now and quickly before the next major storm comes, and before insurance rates skyrocket to the point where it really does become impossible for people to live in our state. That's already happening. The forecasts for the next year or so are just unbelievable. The doubling of rates in some parts of the state. This is a major crisis. This is a major threat to our prosperity. This could become the reason why some of us have to leave this state. I came across a family yesterday. They're moving to the state of Washington. I said, Washington? I said, what, the state? And they said, yes. I said, why are you doing that? It says, Miami's too expensive. And this insurance issue is a big part of it. And we have to go to the root cause, right? It's not the evil insurance companies. I mean, they're not great, but this goes back to our risk. There is major risk here, and a lot of it is directly tied to climate change and to warming seas and strengthening storms. All of this matters. So, again, big opportunity for bipartisan consensus. Let's invest in infrastructure. Let's continue elevating our roads. Let's protect natural barriers. Let's make sure our reefs are healthy, right? There's a big effort now to replant coral reefs. Coral reefs play a major role in protecting our coastline here, especially on the southeast coast. So, yes, that's another issue. Permitting reform. Further reforming the infrastructure process so that we're making these investments on the front end and not paying so much on the back end. And when we do rebuild, we can't just rebuild to the same standard. We have to build to a higher standard. Our state's been very good at this, okay? I mean, we're good at it. After Hurricane Andrew, We became a model for building codes in the world. But clearly, it's not enough. We have to continue raising those standards. And while it might be more expensive on the front end, we're going to save a lot when it comes to rebuilding, when it comes to insurance rates. I remember also seeing after Hurricane Irma, touring the Florida Keys, Paul Ryan got a Coast Guard plane to take us all over the Florida Keys, side by side, new construction versus old construction. New construction intact, old construction completely devastated. So it does make a difference.
It makes a huge difference. We saw it on Mexico Beach and even on Fort Myers Beach. The things that survived were new, and they were built for Category 5 storms, and they did okay.
That's right.
So now let's open this up to you. Marco Lamano, he's been so patient back there. So Marco is our SNN TV meteorologist and anchorman, and he has been instrumental. He'll be on the stage next. With the Climate Center, he's been a great young meteorologist that really cares about this, and this is his world and yours.
Wonderful.
Young, yes, great. Up in the air, but no, thank you. I'm really glad you are here. I do want to give a shout out to Washington State. I don't know if you've ever been. It is beautiful.
I have. It's beautiful.
Yes.
I love Seattle. I just wouldn't move there.
I went through the whole state, and I'm like, so these are the amber waves of gray. Like, I was shocked. But I love Florida, too, and I'm here. So I do have a question for you. We're going to go in detail about it. So I'm not going to ask you in detail. But when you brought up the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, and primarily the climate portions of it, if there were like just a handful of provisions that really caught your eye, something you have been waiting for or really supported, what would they have been for the Infrastructure Act, the IRA up to now?
Yeah, I think the great value there is the tax credits. I mean, and specifically the fact that there's a provision so that the tax credits are technology neutral. So it's not about rewarding specific types of projects or products. It's about rewarding the products that most efficiently generate zero carbon energy. So look, I think we can do a lot more. I'm on record. I filed a bill supporting carbon pricing, a tax on carbon pollution. I believe in consumption taxes. I think that's a very conservative concept, right? You tax something you want less of. Don't tax things you want more of. I would love to swap some income taxes for carbon pollution taxes. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't? We don't want less income. We want to promote people having as much income as possible. We do want less pollution. Now, if you can't get consensus on taxing pollution, you can kind of do the same thing, except you make it sound better, which is you give tax credits to those that are generating energy without polluting. And that's essentially what we've done, and I'm just very supportive of all of that. And there are many other provisions. I'm following very closely a provision to create a national green bank that will help invest in less fortunate communities, economically stressed communities, so that they can put up solar panels and reach true energy independence. So I just think there's a lot of good in the bill, and a lot of Republicans agreed. The problem is that it was passed using the reconciliation process, which intentionally excludes the minority from the lawmaking process. And of course, Republicans also didn't support some of the health care and tax provisions in that bill. But interestingly, first bill Republicans passed this Congress was to repeal the IRS portion of the Inflation Reduction Act. They did not move to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act because there isn't support for that among Republicans, or there isn't enough support for that. So again, there's more and more evidence of a growing bipartisan consensus, and that's good news for this issue.
Another question. Susan.
Yes, hi. How can you talk about the conflict between Florida being a high-growth state and that we are very open to having more people move here, and as you said, making it easier to build housing, with what we were also talking about earlier, which is preserving our natural Florida systems. So this is a state that we want to live in.
I mean, there's an obvious stress, right, between growth and preserving the nature, the culture, the environment, of a state. But I think this can be done responsibly. I mean, look, in Miami, we don't have any more room. So we're going vertical, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. We're redeveloping underutilized space. I mean, in a way, Miami's becoming a little mini Manhattan. And as long as we have the infrastructure in place to absorb that population, and we have a long ways to go specifically in terms of transportation infrastructure, then it's okay. But I mean, your point is extremely valid. Here on the West Coast, for example, there's no public rail system. There's no metro here in Sarasota, so you do have to take that into account as you grow. And look, I've been coming to Longboat Key since I was a child in the 80s, and there's a lot more traffic here than there used to be, and of course that affects quality of life. But as long as you have the infrastructure in place, as long as you're not taking any more from the environment than you need to, I think you can grow responsibly. And I think certainly in Miami now, we really don't have a choice. I mean, we finally decided we're going to stop encroaching on the Everglades. The line still moves from time to time, but it's pretty difficult to move the line. And I think, everywhere else, you have to kind of adopt that mentality and just figure out how to grow within the space you've already claimed from nature, right?
One more, and then I'll have a final question. Where
I really appreciate the perspectives. I'd like to give you a different perspective on having a healthy regulatory agency. And I can't believe I'm going to defend them. For 40 years, I've been in water management, permitting, getting permits from agencies. And the state of Florida recognized that their stormwater, water quality regulations were not good enough, and proceeded I served on the state's technical advisory committee for probably 3 years to update the stormwater regulations. When the Scott administration came in, we were told it's dead. Nothing's happening. And so that was in 2010, and I can't count the red tide events and blue-green algae and all of that occurred in that decade. The state finally has no choice. They have to get on that and do it now. The agencies were torn down so dramatically that I will tell you it was much harder to get permits if you don't have personnel that understand the intent of the rules. You end up with less employees that don't really understand what they're doing, and it makes it more difficult to get permits or to get permits that make sense. And the third thing I noticed is that those cuts resulted in a dramatic decrease in the collection of water quality data by the state of Florida. It is so difficult to solve problems for water quality if you don't have data. Data is key for solving all our problems. So I advocate a permitting may be a unnecessary evil, I think, that we all know, but it is so important to have competent government people
Well,
and
let me
regulatory agencies.
just say I fully agree with you, and I didn't mean to say anything that would have been perceived to counter anything you've said. I'm for regulation. I mean, if we didn't have regulations or regulators, trust me, especially where I'm from, people would be doing a lot of horrible things. They still do, despite the fact that they might get caught. So that's exactly right. However, I don't think there's any doubt that a lot of times government is inefficient and slow, and that not every regulator is adept or competent in doing their job. And right now, there's a great need, because we have this issue of carbon pollution, to bring new projects online. And what I'd like to see, and others would like to see, is to see those processes expedited as much as possible so that we can bring those projects online as soon as possible. So the idea is, how do we achieve everything we need to achieve, check all the boxes that we need to check, but in 1 year versus 3 years. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for that question. So I have a final question for you, and then I have to say one more thing. But
This is like a string bet.
yeah, so the climate economy, you mentioned it. You said about America leading the charge. I don't know who else is out there that could really do it. But we need to accept the challenge and do it. And if we do, the rest of the world is going to be fine if we take the leadership role. What are your, I call it the climate economy because it's not the blue economy for the oceans and it's not the green economy for energy production. It's all of these things together. What can we do to unify all of these groups that are looking to do those individual things so that we have an umbrella, the climate economy, in our educational outlook, in the way we regulate, in the way we allocate money, on any level, including on the business level, and you're running a company now, so what would you say?
Look, you're absolutely right. If we don't come to a consensus and get organized, this is not going to get solved. The Chinese aren't going to do it. India's not going to do it. The Europeans will try, but they're not powerful enough to do it. We have to do it. We have to lead the world. And by the way, we should be satisfied and grateful for the fact that that's the truth, that the world needs our leadership. There are some people in our country who sometimes resent the fact that we have to lead the world. No, we should want to lead the world. If other people lead it, we're going to have more problems than we already do. So we should want to lead the world, and on this issue, we must. And the reason we have to get organized is because no treaty or no pact is going to solve this issue. You know, the Paris Agreement, which I criticize the Trump administration for withdrawing from, because, again, I think it's an abdication of leadership, but the truth is the Paris Agreement is only worth the paper that the country signed. What we really need is a permanent and effective national policy that can be exported. Okay, and this is too late to get technical here, but that means that we have to have some kind of border carbon adjustment tax mechanism where we demand that our trade partners meet us where we are in terms of environmental policy, where we demand that they capture the externality of carbon pollution in their economies at least the way we do, if not better. If they exceed our standards, good for them. And by the way, that same policy would not put American exporters at a disadvantage because as our products leave our country, they will receive a credit so that they can compete in other markets. That's the solution. That's how we not convince the world to follow us in this space, because they won't, because they cheat. That's what they do. We have to compel them to follow us so that the world can remain a healthy and prosperous place. And can I tell the Trump story real quick?
That's what I was just going to say. I was going to remind you.
I'd be upset if I don't. Donald Trump, no matter what you think of him, is a very entertaining human being. So I flew up to Palm Beach to meet him. I drove up to Palm Beach to meet him to fly to Key West, which was my district. He was visiting the Joint Interagency Task Force there, which does a lot of drug interdiction work, a fascinating facility there in Naval Air Station, Key West. And had a great trip, had a lot of I was the only member of Congress. I had a lot of time with the president on the plane, 45 minutes, which is a lot of time with the president of the United States because that's how long the flight took. And we talked about a host of issues. When we landed at Boca Chica in Key West, we had a long ride in the presidential limousine, the Beast, down to the Naval Air Station. And I thought to myself, this is a great opportunity to talk to him about sea level rise, because I don't know if you've ever driven down the Florida Keys, but you're on the road and the water's right there. It's scary how close it is to the road. So I said, this, maybe I can help them understand how important this is. So we're driving down, and I part of the road where the water was particularly close, the road was low. I said, Mr. President, look, I want to point this out to you because in our visit to the Naval Air Station, we're going to meet with some residents, and this issue might come up. People here are very concerned about climate change and the effect it's having on sea level rise. And Trump, without skipping a beat, says, oh, listen, Carlos. I have studied millions of years of history, and trust me, you have nothing to worry about. It's not a problem. So I said, well, thank you, Mr. President, but unfortunately, I can't take your word for it. So anyway, here we are, still trying to fix this challenge. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Carlos, thank you.